In its place, laid neatly atop the foam, were the standard-issue calibration tools, multimeters, oscilloscope probes, wrench sets. They were not the listed modules, and they took up only a fraction of the space. The void where the cylinder had been was a stark, accusatory emptiness. The team froze. This was not an accident or a paperwork error. This was a substitution. A heavy, sensitive 1-meter-long cylinder had been carefully removed from a sealed, lead-lined crate sometime between Kodinsk and Marker 20 on Supply Route 77, and a box of ordinary tools had been put in its place. But how? The convoy had never stopped for long enough. The cargo had been under constant guard. The crate seals were intact. A frantic search commenced. They scanned the truck for hidden compartments, examined the underside for signs of cutting or welding. They found nothing. They reviewed the driver's log and the testimonies of the now dead soldiers. No unscheduled stops, no reports of tampering. They even considered the impossible. Had the cylinder been removed at the scene after the men were dead? But the snow, the pristine, untouched snow around the convoy was the final, impossible witness. No vehicle had approached. No footprints led to or from the truck. The cylinder, weighing perhaps 50 kilograms, had not been carried away through the deep snow without leaving a trail. It had simply vanished. The implications were staggering. Either someone with unimaginable access and skill had infiltrated the convoy mid-journey, performed a perfect switch on a sealed crate, and left without a trace, an act of espionage so clean it was magical. Or something else had occurred. The presence of the shrieking EMF meter took on a new, more terrifying dimension. Had the cylinder not been stolen, but activated? Was it not a component, but a device, a self-contained experiment or weapon that at 0318 had emitted the field recorded by the meter, a field that consumed its creators, and then dematerialized? Or was it retrieved by a method that left no tracks on snow? The KGB team filed a report so highly classified it was said to have been written by hand, copied once, and the original burned. The official inventory was silently altered to match what was found. The tools were now listed as the intended cargo. The lead-lined crate and its telltale foam were destroyed. The mystery of the cylinder was buried deeper than the permafrost, known only to a handful of men who would take the truth to their graves. The investigation now had not just an unexplained death, but a missing object, a ghost in the machine, that made the entire incident smell not of tragedy, but of a terrifying and unfathomable transaction. The neurologists and biologists were baffled. They studied the tissue samples with the crystalline patterning. One dissenting report, quickly suppressed, suggested the patterning was consistent with exposure to a form of energy that caused coherent oscillation in cellular water molecules, effectively shaking the cells apart at a microscopic level without generating heat. It was a theory of death by resonant frequency, but it was just a theory, with no weapon system, natural or man-made, to pin it on. The meteorologists offered the most mundane, and thus most unsettling, possibility. They spoke of rare atmospheric events, clear air turbulence on an electromagnetic scale, or a localized, intense manifestation of the Earth's magnetic field anomalies known to exist in Siberia. Could a perfect storm of geomagnetic and weather conditions have, for 9 minutes, turned that stretch of road into a microwave oven tuned to human biology? It was a natural explanation, which made it both comforting and utterly terrifying, for it meant the very atmosphere of the motherland could, without warning, turn lethal. Commissia Morose deliberated for 3 months. Its final report was a masterpiece of obfuscation. It stated that the soldiers of Unit 452 had perished in the line of duty due to a combination of extreme environmental factors and an unforeseen technical anomaly associated with experimental equipment. The cause of death was officially listed as acute cardiorespiratory failure induced by severe climatic stress. The EMF graph, the pinned needle, the crystalline tissue samples, all were classified as instrument error and post-mortem freezing artifacts.
The report was stamped "Oviachaishi Vajnosti," of utmost importance, and filed in a vault belonging to the KGB's first chief directorate, where it would gather dust alongside files on UFO sightings and psychic research. The panic was not resolved, it was merely contained, bottled under layers of top-secret stamps and official lies. The truth was, the Soviet Union, a state that prided itself on knowing everything and controlling everything, had been confronted with an event it could not explain, could not attribute to an enemy, and could not defend against. The silence that fell over Supply Route 77 was not just the absence of sound, it was the sound of a superpower swallowing a scream, choosing the comfort of a sanctioned fiction over the terrifying void of an unanswered question. The convoy remained, for them, a frozen monument not to an enemy's malice, but to the limits of their own understanding, a mystery buried not in the Siberian permafrost, but in the cold, deep archives of a state that feared the unknown more than any NATO bomb. The silence imposed from Moscow was absolute, but beneath it, in the dimly lit corridors of military academies, in the smoky corners of officers' clubs from Vladivostok to Kaliningrad, a low rumble of speculation began. The official line, acute cardiorespiratory failure induced by extreme environmental factors, was a transparent fiction, an insult to the intelligence of every soldier who had ever endured a Siberian winter. Men did not simply drop dead in unison from the cold, especially not men inside heated vehicles, dressed in Arctic-grade gear, with engines still warm. The rumor mill, fueled by the terrified whispers of the Spetsnaz who had first witnessed the scene and the haunted looks of the medical staff, began to grind out darker, more convoluted theories. The first and most persistent rumor centered on the classified cargo. The men had been transporting components for the Rosres radar, a system whispered to use entirely new principles of emission, pushing into exotic frequencies. Had there been a containment failure, a leak of some radioactive isotope or chemical compound so advanced it left no trace? Perhaps a stealthy, odorless nerve agent developed in the laboratories of Biopreparat, the Soviet bioweapons program, had accidentally been present. But this theory crumbled against the forensics. There were no chemical signatures, no cellular damage consistent with known agents, and most damningly, the civilian technicians, the men most likely to have been handling such materials, were found in the same state as the drivers and infantrymen. A leak would have shown a gradient of exposure, not a perfect simultaneous extinction. The second theory ventured into the realm of the atmospheric. Siberia is a land of profound and strange geophysical phenomena. The region is laced with powerful magnetic anomalies. The Tunguska event still loomed large in the collective memory. Perhaps the convoy had driven into a suddenly forming geomagnetic bubble, a pocket of intensely distorted space where the Earth's natural magnetic field lines kinked and concentrated, scrambling the bioelectrical signals of the brain and heart. It was a theory of death by resonant frequency, yet again the lack of physical damage was the stumbling block. Ball lightning scorched, plasma arced, the pristine snow, the unmarked vehicles, the untouched uniforms, all argued against a violent energy release. The third and most sinister theory whispered of a failed weapons test. This was the darkest thought, the one that spoke to the heart of the system's paranoia. What if the convoy itself was the target? What if the Rosres components were not the cargo but the bait? The theory posited that the Soviet Union had been developing a new form of directed energy weapon, a microwave emitter, an infrasound projector, a psychotronic device designed to induce incapacitation or death at a distance. The remote Siberian wilderness would be the perfect testing ground. Perhaps Unit 452 had been deliberately sent into a live field trial of a system designed to disable NATO crews without damaging equipment. Something had gone wrong. The setting had been too high, the exposure too long. The pinned EMF meter was the key piece of evidence for this camp. It had recorded the weapon's footprint. This theory explained the simultaneity of death and the lack of physical damage, but it raised monstrous, unanswerable questions. Would the Kremlin really sacrifice 40 of their own men, including a respected captain and valuable technicians, in such a callous manner? And if so, why leave the evidence, the convoy, the bodies, the meter, to be found? A cleanup team would have been simpler. The theory painted a picture of such profound, nihilistic incompetence that even the most cynical officers struggled to accept it. Yet all these theories, from the chemical to the atmospheric to the conspiratorial, shattered against the one immovable crystalline fact, the absolute absence of damage. This was not a scene of violence. It was a scene of cessation. Theories could explain death, but they could not explain the perfect preservation, the interrupted moments, the sense of a pause button being hit on reality itself. The playing cards fanned out, the half-smoked cigarette, the steaming tea frozen mid-cooling. These details argued against panic, against agony, against any process that took measurable time. This pointed to an effect that was not just lethal, but instantaneous and all-encompassing, something that operated on a timescale faster than human nerve conduction, something that left the material world untouched while deleting the animating spark within it. Moscow could entertain rumors of leaks and weapons, but it could not and would not admit to facing a phenomenon that behaved with the selectivity and precision of a supernatural force. To do so would be to acknowledge a vulnerability beyond the scope of 5-year plans and missile shields. Amid the chaos of the investigation, one truck stood apart, the Gaz-66 carrying the Rosres components. It had been the focus of Professor Lysenko's terrified interest due to the EMF meter. Once the initial forensics were complete, a specialized KGB technical team, reporting directly to Commissia Morose, took custody of it. They worked with the methodical, paranoid care of men handling a live bomb. The manifest, signed by the KGB officer at Kodinsk, listed 6 items: 3 crates of waveguide amplifiers, 2 crates of frequency-agile magnetron units, and 1 crate of calibration and diagnostic modules. The crates were heavy, lead-lined, and sealed with wax imprinted with the insignia of the design bureau. The team, using diamond-tipped saws to avoid the risk of explosive anti-tamper devices, cut through the locks and hinges. The first 5 crates contained exactly what was listed: complex, pristine electronic components nestled in custom-cut foam, serial numbers matching the paperwork. The 6th crate, the one containing the calibration and diagnostic modules, was different. Externally, it was identical. The seals were unbroken. The weight, as recorded on the original loading dock sheet, was correct. But when the lid was pried open, the interior told a different story. The foam had been custom-fitted for a single central object, a cylindrical container, approximately 1 meter long and 30 centimeters in diameter. The impression in the foam was crisp and deep, but the cylinder was gone.
The bodies were not scattered, lost in the wilderness. They were found within the convoy itself, a fact that twisted the mystery into an even tighter knot. In the hours following the initial discovery, the Spetsnaz team, expanding their search grid with grim determination, made the find. The men of Unit 452 were not missing. They were exactly where they should have been, yet impossibly, horrifyingly, not. They were discovered inside the vehicles or immediately beside them, having collapsed at their posts. The driver of the lead BTR was slumped halfway out of his open door, his torso resting on the cold metal step as if he had been in the process of dismounting. The 2 soldiers playing Duroc were found on the floor of their truck's cargo bed, the cards scattered around them as if dropped from suddenly limp fingers. The radio operator, Pavel, was still in his seat in the communications truck, his headset askew, his hand resting near the transmit switch. The civilian technicians were in the rear of the specialized Gaz-66, one of them lying beside the shrieking EMF meter. Captain Ilyin was found standing, frozen rigid, leaning against the fuel tanker, his eyes open and fixed on the tree line, a look of profound, unblinking concentration etched onto his ice-glazed features. Not a single man had drawn his weapon. Not one had attempted to run, to take cover, or to aid a comrade. They had fallen where they stood or sat, a synchronized collapse that spoke of an instantaneous, universal cause. The medical team arrived not in ambulances, but in a grim, windowless Ilyushin IL-76 transport, a flying pathology lab. Led by Colonel Dr. Vasily Krenke, a forensics expert who had seen every manner of death the Afghan war could produce, they set up a sterile field tent near the convoy, powered by growling, fume-belching generators. The process that followed was one of meticulous, chilled horror. Each body, stiff and brittle with the cold, was carefully extracted, photographed in situ, and placed on a collapsible aluminum table under the stark, buzzing lights of the tent. The external examinations yielded nothing. No bullet wounds, no shrapnel lacerations, no signs of blunt force trauma, no defensive wounds on hands or arms. Their winter uniforms were intact, with no rips, no burn marks, no chemical staining. Their skin showed no discolorations typical of poisoning, no cherry red blush of carbon monoxide, no telltale blistering of a chemical agent. Their expressions, where visible, ranged from neutral to mildly curious. There was no universal rictus of pain, no contortions of agony. The internal examinations, conducted with swift clinical precision in the sub-zero air, deepened the mystery. Toxicology screens, run on portable analyzers, came back negative for nerve agents, pesticides, alcohol, or any known toxin. Blood gases showed no sign of suffocation. Major organs appeared healthy and undamaged upon gross examination. There were no cerebral hemorrhages, no cardiac ruptures. It was as if the switch governing life had simply been flipped to off in 42 individuals simultaneously, without any physical damage to the machinery. Dr. Krenke, a man of absolute empirical belief, found himself grasping for straws. He ordered more specific tests. Could it have been a massive, localized oxygen depletion? The snow samples showed normal atmospheric composition. A sudden extreme pressure change? There were no ruptured eardrums or pulmonary barotrauma. An acoustic weapon? An infrasound beam? No damage to the delicate bones of the inner ear. He examined the eyes under magnification, looking for petechial hemorrhages indicative of strangulation or pressure. He found none. The only consistent, anomalous finding was microscopic and initially dismissed as an artifact of freezing. Tissue samples from the brainstems and cardiac muscles of several subjects, when later examined under higher magnification at a proper institute, showed a peculiar crystalline patterning in the cellular structures, a subtle fracturing at the molecular level, unlike anything caused by simple ice crystallization. It was as if the very architecture of the cells had been subjected to a powerful, resonant vibration. But this was a footnote, a curiosity. It provided no cause of death. Frustrated, Krenke turned to the environmental data. The pinned EMF meter was the elephant in the room. He consulted with a physicist flown in from the Academy of Sciences, a nervous man named Professor Lysenko, who kept adjusting his glasses as he stared at the torn graph paper. The field strength recorded here is off the scale, literally. It suggests an electromagnetic pulse of incredible power, but one that is focused, sustained, and of a frequency our equipment is not designed to measure. It is not like a lightning strike. It is more like a beam, a directed energy event of unprecedented nature. But it left no burns, Krenke countered, his breath fogging in the cold tent. Precisely, Lysenko whispered, his face pale. Not that kind of energy. This is something else, a non-thermal effect. It could, theoretically, interact with the electrical impulses of the nervous system. The body is a bioelectrical machine, Colonel Doctor. If you could generate a field that precisely matched and overrode the natural frequencies of the brain and heart, he trailed off, unwilling to voice the conclusion. The autopsies ended with a formal, bewildering verdict. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined. The men of Unit 452 were, by all measurable forensic science, perfectly healthy until the moment they were not. They had not been killed. They had simply stopped. The report from the scene, a compilation of Kolesnik's military assessment, Krenke's non-findings, and Lysenko's terrified speculation, landed in Moscow like a live grenade. In the Kremlin and the fortified headquarters of the KGB on Dzerzhinsky Square, a specific cold panic began to spread, the panic of the unexplained.
This was not a NATO airstrike. It was not an act of partisan sabotage. It was not a natural disaster. It was a phenomenon, and phenomena in the Soviet system were threats to be controlled, understood, and above all, hidden. Orders were issued with the blunt force of absolute authority. The entire region within 50 kilometers of the Route 77 was declared a zona strogala regime, a zone of strict regime. Checkpoints manned by KGB border troops sprang up on every approach road. The airspace above was declared permanently closed, patrolled by pairs of MiG-25s with shoot-to-kill orders. The local Evenki reindeer herders were quietly relocated, their villages declared under sanitary quarantine. The world was to be shown a blank spot on the map where nothing of interest had occurred. An investigation was launched, but it was not a search for culprits. It was a desperate hunt for a category. Codenamed Commission Morose, Commission Frost, it was a uniquely Soviet hybrid of power and paranoia. Chaired by a deputy chairman of the KGB, it included senior officers from GRU military intelligence, leading physicists from the secretive Raduga and Almaz design bureaus, which worked on directed energy weapons, top neurologists from the Serbsky Institute, and even a team of geophysicists and meteorologists. Each branch chased its own phantom. The KGB interrogated every person who had any connection to Unit 452, from the clerks who packed their rations to the scientists at Kodinsk who built the radar components, searching for signs of treason, sabotage, or careless talk. They found only frightened, loyal citizens. The GRU analysts pored over satellite imagery and SIGINT intercepts from the night of the event, looking for any unusual American or Chinese activity, a passing satellite, an anomalous radio signal, an aircraft signature. The data was frustratingly clean. The purga that had grounded rescue efforts had also shrouded the area from orbital eyes. The physicists, led by a now terrified Professor Lysenko, were the most agitated. They conducted field tests with duplicate equipment. They could not reproduce the EMF spike. They theorized wildly, an accidental discharge from the secret radar components, but the crates were sealed. A natural phenomenon? A piezoelectric effect from seismic stress in the ancient rock, converting mechanical strain into a massive electromagnetic burst? Seismographs showed no activity. A weapon? They studied Western scientific journals for hints of radio frequency bioeffects or psychotronic weapons, falling down a rabbit hole of their own propaganda and fringe science.
The sky over eastern Siberia in February of 1978 was not a canopy, but a lid, a heavy, seamless vault of iron-gray cloud pressed down on the endless expanse of the taiga, a world rendered in monochrome, the black spear points of pine trees, the aching white of the snow, and the grim, frozen rivers like scars on the land. The cold was not merely in condition, it was a physical presence, a silent, sucking force that stole breath in sanity. In this void, the drone of a solitary Soviet Tupolev Tu-128 Fiddler interceptor on a desolate reconnaissance patrol along the BAM railway corridor was the only sign of human endeavor. The pilot, Major Valery Grigorenko, was a man hardened by 2 decades of watching this empty frontier. His mission was a formality, a relic of border paranoia, to look for nothing and to report nothing. His radar swept the frozen earth, painting the familiar, ghostly returns of rock formations and dense forest. Then, something new, a cluster of sharp, geometric returns alongside the gravel service road known as Supply Route 77, a threadbare track connecting a distant radar outpost to the railhead at Toximo. The pattern was unmistakable. Vehicles, a convoy, but the configuration was all wrong. They were not moving, they were not spaced for travel, they were clustered together haphazardly like toys dropped by a giant.
Grigorenko banked the heavy fighter, descending through the cloud layer for a visual confirmation. What he saw through the swirling snow made his gloved hand tighten on the stick. A column of military vehicles, perhaps 15 in total, sat motionless on the road. Ural 375D trucks, a fuel tanker, two BTR-60 armored personnel carriers at the front and rear. Their canvas covers were stiff with rime. No exhaust plumes melted the snow around their tailpipes. No tracks led away into the forest. No figures moved between them. It was a tableau of perfect stillness. He keyed his mic, his voice crackling with static, breaking the sterile silence of the Regional Air Defense Command Center. Center, this is Falcon 4. Visual contact on Supply Route 77, grid reference 547822. A military convoy is stationary. Repeat, stationary. No visible activity, no visible distress signals. Vehicles appear intact. There was a long pause, filled only with the hiss of the void. The controller's response was clipped, bewildered. Falcon 4 confirmed no movement, no personnel? Grigorenko made another pass, lower this time, the thunder of his engines surely echoing through the silent valley below. Nothing stirred. Center, negative. No movement, no personnel visible. The convoy is cold. The word hung in the air. In the Siberian winter, a cold vehicle outside of a heated garage meant it had been dead for hours. The men assigned to it could not have survived outside for minutes. He signed off, a knot of primal unease forming in his gut. He had just reported an impossibility. The convoy, designated Transport Unit 452, had departed the secure facility at Kodinsk 2 days prior. Its cargo was listed on manifests seen only by the KGB transport officer and the unit commander, Captain Boris Ilyin. Specialized electronic components, Category A. In the labyrinthine parlance of the Soviet military-industrial complex, this could mean anything from vacuum tubes for a new radio to parts for a nuclear weapon. But the whispers among the 42 men of the unit, 38 soldiers and 4 civilian technicians, leaned towards the former. They were hauling equipment for RASRES, a new hypersensitive early warning radar being installed at the distant outpost of Boguchar. The technology was so advanced, it was said to be able to track the flight of a bird over Alaska, and it required components so delicate they could not be shipped by air due to vibration. Hence the slow, grinding road convoy across 700 kilometers of the world's most unforgiving terrain. The journey was misery, a battle against the elements fought in 5-mile increments. Engines had to be kept running at stops to prevent freezing solid. Men took turns, red-faced and gasping, digging out vehicles that plunged into snowdrifts. But morale was steady. Captain Ilyin was a competent, paternal leader. The communications sergeant, a young conscript named Pavel, maintained strict radio discipline, checking in with the relay station at Taksimo every hour on the hour. The logs from that station show the routine, grim progress. 2200, Unit 452 reports position at marker 17, proceeding. Conditions severe. 2300, at marker 18, holding for engine check on Vehicle 7. 200, at marker 19, proceeding. Temperature -42. The final transmission, logged at 3:17, was unremarkable. Pavel's voice, thin and strained by the poor connection. Taksimo relay, this is Unit 452. Position at marker 20, all nominal, proceeding. Over. The relay operator acknowledged. Received 452. Next check at 4:17. At 4:17, there was only silence. The operator called again and again. He assumed a radio failure, a common occurrence in the magnetic disturbances of the region. He waited, following protocol, for the 5:17 check. More silence. By 6:30, with dawn still a distant promise, the first tinge of alarm set in. A convoy does not simply vanish. It breaks down, it gets stuck, it calls for help. It does not go quiet. The relay station alerted Kodinsk. Kodinsk alerted the district military command. A search and rescue helicopter was scrambled from Bratsk, but a sudden, localized whiteout storm, a purga, closed over the area like a fist, grounding all aircraft for 18 critical hours. By the time the weather cleared, Unit 452 was already a ghost story. The Tu-128 sighting confirmed the location, but transformed the mystery from a potential breakdown into a profound and chilling riddle. The ground team, a hardened platoon of Spetsnaz scouts flown in by Mi-8 helicopter, approached the convoy with weapons raised, expecting a massacre. The scene that greeted them defied every instinct of a soldier. The vehicle sat in a loose, disordered cluster, as if they had simply coasted to a stop. The lead BTR's driver's side door was open, swinging slightly in the bitter wind. That was the only anomaly. There was no sign of attack. No bullet pock scarred the green metal skin of the trucks. No shrapnel, no blast marks, no burnt paint. The snow around the convoy was pristine, unmarked by footprints, shell craters, or the tragged trails of bodies. It was a perfect, untouched white shroud. The Spetsnaz commander, a grizzled veteran of Afghanistan named Lieutenant Colonel Kolesnik, signaled his men forward. With practiced lethality, they cleared each vehicle. What they found inside was more disturbing than any carnage. In the lead BTR, a half-smoked papyrosis cigarette lay in the ashtray, its filter end neatly pinched. A steaming mug of chai, now frozen solid, sat on the dashboard. In the back of a Ural truck, playing cards were fanned out on a crate, a game of Duroc interrupted mid-hand. Personal items, letters from home, photographs of girlfriends, a small wooden icon of St. Nicholas were placed neatly on seats or tucked into webbing. Weapons, the prized AK-74 rifles, were still secured in their racks, their bolts frozen, unfired. In the cab of the fuel tanker, the driver's logbook lay open, his last entry noting the temperature at 3:15. The keys were in the ignitions. Parkas and heavy Ushanka hats hung on hooks, as if the men had just stepped outside for a moment. But there were no men. Kolesnik ordered a perimeter search, expanding in concentric circles. His men moved like ghosts themselves through the silent pines. They found nothing. No tracks led away from the road, no disturbances in the deep snow of the forest floor, no evidence of an animal attack, no blood, no scraps of clothing. It was as if the 42 souls of Transport Unit 452 had been plucked instantly and utterly from the fabric of reality. The most chilling detail was discovered in the middle of the convoy. A GAZ-66 truck carrying the specialized electronic components had its rear canvas cover partially untied. Inside, the heavy lead-lined crates were intact, their seals unbroken, but mounted on a workbench bolted to the truck bed was a field-deployable electromagnetic field meter, a sensitive device used to measure ambient energy. Its needle was pinned hard against the maximum limit of its scale, and the thin roll of paper graph recorder showed a single, violent, sustained spike that began at approximately 3:18 and lasted for 9 minutes, a minute after the last radio transmission, before the machine itself had apparently failed, the paper torn by the frantic stylus. Next to it, a standard Gauger counter clicked with a slow, lazy rhythm, showing only background radiation. Kolesnik stood in the freezing silence, looking from the pinned needle of the EMF meter to the undisturbed cards on the crate to